Welcome to another episode of the Sports Sentiment. I am your host, Nick Urias, and we are back once again talking college football. It is week 4 as we get ready to kick things off fresh off the bye week out here in San Jose. We got San Jose State and the Idaho Vandals going at it in San Jose this Saturday at 2 p.m. San Jose State 0-2 going into a bye week, and there's been a lot of frustration out here in San Jose after going winless the first 2 weeks. Tough matchups versus Central Michigan and Texas, two physical teams, and the Spartans are trying to regroup after that bye week. And we're here talking San Jose State in Idaho for week 4, and we got ourselves another guest on the podcast as he knows everything between the Idaho Vandals out there in Moscow, Idaho. He's the host of the Tubs at the Club podcast, covering all things University of Idaho athletics. Brian Marceau, thanks for coming on, Brian, and glad to be talking to you today.
Good to be here. Do never like to start off on this kind of footing, but just gotta bring it up. Everyone who does not live in Idaho gets it as Moscow, which it makes sense because it's Moscow, Russia. Spelling is exactly the same. In Idaho, we call it Moscow.
Okay, good to know. Hey, I appreciate that for a little lesson there, and that's good to know. I've never been out there in that part of Idaho. I've done the trip to Boise. When we went to the Potato Bowl, San Jose State did a couple years ago. So, not too familiar with all of Idaho, but I have been in the state of Idaho. So, thank you for that footnote there. But hey, let's talk Spartans and Vandals here because these two teams have not played since 2012. This matchup, head to head all time, these two teams used to play way back when in the 60s every single year. But they get back together. It's an FBS versus FCS showdown. I've been telling everybody out here in San Jose that you cannot overlook the Vandals because they for the most part, over the past couple of years, have played really well against these FBS teams. The Washington State Week 1 matchup on the Battle of the Palouse, a prime example of that. Just overall, just your general thoughts on the Idaho Vandals through the first 3 games of the season thus far.
Yeah, well, and one of the things I wanted to just hit on for about 2 seconds, you brought up, hey, Idaho has done well in FBS. This dates back for about the last 4 years. Where Idaho, well, I mean, for the last 2 years, Idaho's picked up FBS wins. 2 years ago, really just beat the hell out of Nevada, and then held on against Wyoming. That's two Mountain West. Idaho absolutely gave the game against WSU away. There's about if we replayed that game 10 times, I'd expect Idaho to win 7, just based off how that went. But it's also been a broad trend of this season. Mountain West teams have picked up W's against Big Sky teams, but I mean, look at Nevada, Sacramento State. Sacramento State threw a game-winning touchdown to Nevada late in the game. We already talked about Idaho, WSU, Northern Colorado got absolutely screwed with a call. What would have been a game-winning touchdown over Colorado State. So, I mean, you're right. I think on both sides, this is a matchup, for San Jose State end to not look past, but at the Idaho end, like, hey, you got to show up still. Just because you've done it a few times doesn't mean it happens every time. So through the first 3 weeks, Idaho's got a new head coach. His name's Thomas Ford. He's not new to Idaho. He was the special teams coordinator and running backs coach for during the 2021 and the 2022 and 2023 seasons under Jason Eck. Idaho made the playoffs both those seasons last year. Ford was the running back coach at Oregon State. He's relatively famous in this area as a real strong recruiter, and I would highly, highly recommend people ignore his record at Simon Fraser. He won 2 games in 2 years at Simon Fraser. That's a Canadian school that no longer has football. He was voted Coach of the Year one of his years at Simon Fraser for getting that team competitive. So that just FYI, you're gonna look at the record. You might say like, "Hey, what's going on here?" The reality is Simon Fraser was. It's not worth your time in terms of understanding Idaho. I'd look at what Ford's done so far. Idaho sits at 2-1. They've been up and down. not in a negative way, but more in a, hey, like at the FCS level, it's pretty normal when you have a coaching turnover. You might get a new head coach, you might get a new OC, in their first year. There's a little bit of lumps, you might say, going through. That's more what Idaho's been. They've been, I mean, look, they should be 3-0. They gave the WSU game away. That was a 13-10 game that Idaho, Idaho had it tied up with 1 minute and 45 seconds left in regulation. Idaho then, they won 37-30 over St. Thomas. That game was a little bit inverse of the WSU game. That against WSU, Idaho allowed less than 10 rushing yards on the game. Like their rushing defense was excellent against WSU. It was secondary that was exploited. Against St. Thomas, Idaho essentially moved the ball however they wanted to, both through the air and on the ground. Joshua Wood himself nearly counted for 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, was the Big Sky Player of the Week. I'm sure we'll talk about Wood later. Then last week, Idaho beat Utah Tech 13-6. It's 20-6. It was a really weird game because Utah Tech made it past the 50-yard line about twice. Their 2 scores were on field goals of 50-plus yards. Idaho completely shut them down on the ground. And through the air. Although Utah Tech's not a fantastic passing team, what they try to do is run the ball, which they could not do against Idaho at all. And Idaho dominated time of possession. The Utah Tech had the ball for 55-0 total seconds in the first quarter. Idaho just wasn't finishing drives. Missed 2 field goals. Had a couple different drives that kind of sputtered out after about 30 yards. So the Vandals, they put the nail in the coffin with about 6 minutes left on a Joshua Wood 22-yard touchdown run. But that was a game that if you look at the score, it's a little confusing because Idaho dominated that wire to wire. They just didn't capitalize offensively in the way they should have in spite of moving the ball.
Interesting. And, you mentioned your QB1 and Joshua Wood, which, this is a guy that came from Fresno State, which, I think plays an interesting dynamic in this game, given the fact that San Jose State and Fresno State, the rivalry that they have there. So he is very familiar, just with the San Jose State spread and shred offense, the way that they're going to throw the ball, all the concepts and everything within that nature. So I just think that's an interesting dynamic heading into this one. Like, hey, this is not one of these QBs that is not going to be, lost out there. He could provide his input into the game plan in a sense, give, just overall his, general consensus on what he's seen from a bird's eye view, formerly in the Mountain West. But, just talk to me about what Woods brought to the table, because this is a dual threat quarterback. He leads his team in rushing, 273 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns through 3 games. This guy's a force to be reckoned with, and SJSU has not been the greatest on the rushing defense side of things so far this season. That Central Michigan game was very, very nutty. The way that CMU was running their quarterback system, very, very uncharacteristic. What do you make of Wood and his progress, and just overall him navigating the offense here thus far?
Joshua Wood Wood signing at Idaho kind of blew the ceiling open for what the potential of Idaho can be this year. Like as you hit on, he's the leading rusher for the Vandals. He's rushed for 85, 87, 101 yards. That's not a chronological number, but it's a reference point. He obviously leads the team in yards per rush, but it's important to know about Wood on the ground. Look, Idaho's going to call some RPOs for sure, and sometimes like the big play option for Idaho is Wood keeps the ball and goes. Wood can also, of course, extend plays. At Fresno State, he played every game last year as a rusher. He only played 1 game as a passer, but on the ground, he's a threat, man. I mean, if you look at him, you can miss how strong he is because he has his body frame looks a little bit on the slimmer side. But he's a tough dude. He rarely slides to avoid hits, which Phase 1 actually did give Vandals some kind of PTSD that first game against WSU. But in the previous 2 games, it does look like Coach Ford and co. are trying to limit how many times Wood hits the ground. Now, he absolutely will tuck and run. He absolutely will run to extend plays, like I said. But he appears to be leaned on a little more heavily in the fourth quarter. For more design runs as needed. But Wood on the ground is a big deal. Now, through the air, he's been pretty good too. The WSU game, Look, the WSU game was rough for Idaho. Look, they scored 10 points, and you score 10 points, you're not going to have spectacular numbers. I'd look at the previous two games where against St. Thomas, Wood threw a pick on his very first pass. It looked like he just decided, hey, he was taking a deep strike, probably Wednesday before that week. Since that pass, Wood has thrown for 4 touchdowns, completion percentage right around 75-ish. And last week against Tech, had a touchdown bounce right off the hands of a receiver. You look at his totals from last week, you essentially should add about 70 yards of passes that hit people in the hands that just were drops. That was part of what I was saying. That game was kind of weird for Idaho. But Joshua Wood, look, the offensive line for Idaho is probably it's as good as it's been in the last 4 years. But Joshua Wood adds a different dynamic to the running game because in addition to, the O-line playing solid, he manufactures plays himself.
Yeah, I was telling a couple of our guys, out here in San Jose that I do a radio show with, and it's just like, hey, we're playing. This is going to be. I don't care if it's coming off a bye. This is going to be another physical game because I know Jason Eck, former offensive lineman, now at New Mexico, was the 3 years at Idaho, was very successful there. I feel like you guys have always just kind of prided on, line of scrimmage battle. We're going to out physical you. Is that kind of the same way, that the same vibe in a sense that, hey, we got the guys to, kind of go ground and pound and, really win that battle on the line of scrimmage and let us dictate the game that way, and then let our passing game open up that way? Is that the way this 2025 Vandals group is kind of leaning towards?
Through the first 3 games, that's safe. Now, the fact that Joshua Wood can run the ball does slightly skew that number because there are inevitably some. If you're looking at like the plays called run pass, inevitably Wood's going to pick up a few rushes that were, of course, not called as rushes. But it's actually been a little bit more heavy this year with Thomas Ford, Idaho being a run first. Like with under Jason Eck, like they still were, but like the pass rush split was quite variable per game, and it seemed like the ideal Jason Eck play call at Idaho was probably 40 to 45 pass, 55 to 60% rush. Ford's been a little bit more heavy in that end, which look, Ford was he was a running back coach at Idaho at Oregon State. He was a collegiate running back. He's also a former special teams coordinator. I don't know you guys' backgrounds with special teams coordinators who become head coaches, but at least in the Big Sky, we've experienced those guys tend to kind of be run the ball first. Doesn't mean they won't take the occasional risk, occasional trick play, go for it on fourth down when you're a little anxious about it. So there's still some of that. But Idaho has been overt in essentially all their messaging about wanting to establish themselves as a team running the football. And look at the last 2 FCS games. You can look at the WSU game too. Just as a fan, I kind of throw out the WSU game because I just think there was a lot Idaho was still kind of sorting with a first-time OC, first-time D1 head coach. And I think Idaho played more conservative against WSU than they're actually going to be most of this year. But against Utah Tech, Idaho passed the ball 25 times. They ran the ball 46 times. You want to take out a sack, fine. They ran the ball 40. They passed the ball 25 times for 45 rushes. Again, St. Thomas, Idaho passed it again 25 times and rushed it 35. Well, one was a muff punt, but like whatever, fine. They rushed it 34 times per 25. That ratio has been pretty solid the last 2 games. All the messaging Idaho's had the whole year has been like, hey, they want to run the football first. They want to run the football first. And it was kind of a breakthrough game against Utah Tech last week that finally a running back led the team in rushes. Wood led them the first 2 games. But Art Williams, who will probably be the number 1 running back against San Jose State with Elisha Cummings was announced as out. He's also kind of the pass catching back for Idaho. He's out in the third running back who Idaho had expected to essentially split the number 1 reps close to a third between Art Williams, Joshua Wood, and then Nate Thomas. Nate Thomas kind of power back. It is unclear what he's going to be at. He came to Idaho after contributing at South Dakota, another FCS school. He had a terrible knee injury, then came to Idaho and was pretty solid last year. But he's had some nagging injuries that Idaho has been kind of purposely babying because this Vandal team believes they're going to make a playoff run. So they've been open like, hey, we kind of care about his availability in the conference schedule the most. So I would expect you guys are going to see Art Williams as the number one running back. It doesn't usually catch a ton of passes, but he's been getting better and better. Last week was easily Williams' most effective game, 16 carries for 144 yards.
Yeah, there you have it. Art Williams, RB1. I'd expect a whole lot of Joshua Wood RPOs, just given the fact that just the way that SJSU, just quite frankly, even going back to last year, and I know you don't want to compare, last year to this year, given the portal era and stuff like that, but quite frankly, it's been an issue for San Jose State. These mobile quarterbacks that have the ability to extend plays, scamper on their feet, and turn a negative play into a positive play. So, just hearing the press conference this week, San Jose State's on high alert with that. It's just a matter of can they go out there and stop it, of course. I want to talk about the Vandals defense here because I feel like you guys got two catalysts on that defense at the linebacker position with Isaiah King and Dylan Lane. Dylan Lane's still a Vandal. This is the brother of Jack Lane, who ended up going with Jason Eck to New Mexico. Usually you'll see kind of guys, when the brothers or, a lot of the players go with where the new head coach goes. I don't know if you have the backstory behind, Dylan Lane staying behind out there in Idaho with the Vandals, but he's obviously a big time contributor along with King to your defense.
The Dylan Lane story, which is inextricable from the Jack Lane story for Idaho, is actually it's quite interesting, quite up and down. Jack Lane came to Idaho, the New Mexico quarterback who started for Idaho last season. He came to Idaho as a walk-on. The guy who got the scholarship was Dylan to play linebacker. And then Jack Lane just kind of blew up as a passer. Both Jack and Dylan had been described by Jason Eck, and now Dylan by Thomas Ford as two of the smarter guys they've ever had the experience of coaching. Dylan Lane was a starter at linebacker, or at least in the rotation as a first off the bench last season, but he kind of lost his spot. And by the end of the year, he just wasn't really playing. To my knowledge, he didn't go to New Mexico because I don't think he was offered. But he's put it back together here. He's one of the captains, one of the leaders of the team, and he's really stepped up as a contributor now. I don't know if just the role he happened to have with Jason Eck, or if the play calling under Court Dennison, new DC, is just something that works with Lane. Also, people do get that as they get older. That happens. But yeah, Dylan Lane and Isaiah King have been instrumental for Idaho. The third linebacker you're going to see the most. It's kind of toggled between number 10, Will Cornelson, number 44, Cruz Hepburn. Cruz Hepburn appears to have kind of moved up and taken the spot Cornelson was playing. Not that Cornelson's not, you'll see number 10 Cornelson, but Hepburn has kind of taken over that starter's role. And one of the things that's really stood out, part of why Idaho's been as good as they've been, on the ground. Like, hey, last week, Utah Tech rushes 25 times for 98 yards. I already brought up against, WSU rushed it 22 times for 3 yards in that game. Idaho's been tackling one-on-one very well this season. Counts the running game. That counts the screen pass game as well. But Isaiah King and Dylan Lane are kind of exhibit 1, exhibit A, part of what it does. From moving the ball and try to get to third and long is like this team. If you look at the D line, this is a team where their identity is speed, and hey, if that's going to be your identity, you got to be able to tackle well because they're Idaho's been outsized. You match D. I know we were talking about linebackers, but you match up D line, O line. This will be the third straight game. Idaho's D line is going to be probably about 15-ish pounds on average smaller than the opposition. That has not really been an issue for Idaho in 2 out of the 3 games. The St. Thomas game, by the way, St. Thomas is not a bad team. That looked like your classic Idaho overlooked the team and held on for a win. Which you could. Sometimes it's hard to know what those FBS FCS games mean for both teams, right? Because hey, for the FBS team, hey, maybe there absolutely are probably some losses from teams overlooking an opponent from some FCS, but then at the FCS end, they can be like, hey, you look good, you think you're more than you are, and then you look past the next team, and that's what happened to Idaho week 2. So I'm not super worried about Idaho on the ground defensively because two out of the 3 they've been doing pretty damn fine.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I totally get where you say with the FBS versus FCS matchups, hey, it's kind of tough to gauge, right? how much do you really learn about your team? How much can we really take away from a game like this? And you could say that for both sides. And when you move on to the following week, I could just tell you that SJSU, with their offensive scheme, is going to pass the ball. So your rushing numbers will probably look pretty good this week from a rushing defense standpoint, just because it's been very subpar to say the least. Are the San Jose State ground attack. Now they do have 3 talented backs, but this is a pass first team, and the coaching staff has been like, hey, we're going to lean on the run game. And we saw that last week versus 2 weeks ago versus Texas, but it was kind of almost like, hey, let's protect our quarterback and let's just get out of town here alive, facing the Texas Longhorns and that NFL caliber defense. So the rushing numbers look good from 2 weeks ago, but I don't know how much you can really gauge from that in a sense. But obviously the premier matchup to me, obviously line of scrimmage is essential, but SJSU wide receivers, because they got a few talented, tons of talented wide receivers versus your secondary. Danny Scudero for SJSU at wide receiver. He's second in the Mountain West in receiving yards with 249 yards. Kyrie Scholes has been a guy that has jumped up in the depth chart due to some injuries. He's got 10 receptions for 87 yards. We'll see if San Jose State can get their deep ball guy, Leland Smith, a little bit more involved. I know that they've been giving him targets, but quarterback Walker Eget, along with him, just haven't really been on the same page, I would say. And our quarterback Walker Eget, as a whole, he's got more interceptions than touchdowns. I just think he needs a get right game. So, Brian, where are you at with your secondary? I know 3 games in here, hard to gauge maybe where we're at in a sense, but I feel like we got a large enough of a sample size maybe as far as where you see your defensive backs, because San Jose State wide receivers in man coverage there are going to be essential in a game like this.
If you were asking like, hey, what's the relative strength of Idaho defensively right now, hey, 3 games in, you would certainly not call it the secondary. That's the group that was decimated by both transfers, but also graduation from last year. So like the entire 2 deep in the secondary is new. And there's been some minor shuffling in the 2 deep over the last couple of weeks. Portland State transfer Zach Wustig starting one of them starting safety, the other's John. John played for Idaho last year, but he was you'd call him a depth piece. So being a starter, being one of the guys on defense, with the headset on, that's certainly a new role for him. So in 2 of the 3 games, Idaho. The way Idaho's defense let them down a little bit, and I say a little bit against WSU, because if your team holds the opposition to 13 points, you're going to win that game 90% of the time. But WSU could exclusively move the ball through the air. You look at the St. Thomas game, and there's parts of the St. Thomas game that I think are not going to repeat themselves. But hey, Andy Peters, the quarterback for St. Thomas, 21 of 29 for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. So there have been two times where the opposition's had success moving the ball through the air against Idaho. Now, some of this is it's just new guys in new roles, because like I said, it's an entirely new 2 deep. And if I'm not going to like read the whole thing, but like, hey, FYI, one of the probably the most talented cornerback for Idaho is starter Caleb Ricks. He's a true freshman. You can expect some learning curves there. Jamel Blenman, he's the other starting corner. This is his first year getting pretty regular reps. The guy, he was behind Andrew Marshall last year. He's starting at Nebraska. So, by the way, Jamel Blenman goes by the name Deuce Blenman. He's number 0, and number 22 is Caleb Ricks. So it's the guys you're going to see as the number 1 and 2 corners for the most part. Those 2 guys are new to their roles, and the way that Idaho was kind of picked apart, according to the coaching staff against St. Thomas, was they felt it was more guys were freelancing instead of sticking to the defensive play call, which is part of why, like, our belief, like a lot of Vandals have no problem saying, okay, well, there's not a ton, I think, that we're concerned about it with that second St. Thomas game. But there's been 2 times where Idaho's been they have had trouble covering the middle of the field. And also WSU beat Idaho deep a couple times and also just misfired on some guys who were open. So I think the group is getting better. I mean, you look at the Utah Tech game, Tech did virtually nothing through the air. But at the same time, San Jose State would probably obliterate Utah Tech. So I wouldn't, that's Utah Tech may be the easiest game, counting last week, one of the easier games left on Idaho's schedule. So if you're looking at a way to take apart Idaho right now, the safe gamble would be through the air because Idaho's shut teams down a couple times on the ground. Has not 100% been the case. With teams who have a quarterback, assuming you're confident in your ability of your quarterback to actually hit guys in stride, not have the pass a little bit too far behind people. That's where I'd be concerned. Now, Idaho did pick up the first pick last week against Utah Tech, and they've had quite a few picks bounce off the hand. So that's one of those things like, hey, a couple of those plays go down, you might completely understand this team differently. But on the other end, is it shocking for guys in new roles to take a minute to capitalize on some of those game altering plays? No, not at all.
So we got ourselves the FBS versus FCS showdown here. I guess, besides a W on the win column here, would you say, is there a unit? Is there certain players that you'll have an eye on in particular in this game that you would like to see, progress in the right direction? Because we all know, you want to win this game, obviously, from an Idaho standpoint. If you're SJSU, you're trying to, get on the right track for Stanford the following week and obviously in Mountain West play. Obviously, the conference games is ones that matter. But you can make an argument for both of these teams. It matters a whole lot, heading into this game just to see some positive momentum into conference play. What are you looking for in particular in this matchup that you'll have your eyes on before you guys hit Big Sky play?
Well, the first is what the game means for both Idaho and San Jose State. It always means a different thing for the FBS team. For Idaho, Idaho's coming into this game, and I expect they believe San Jose State is a team they'll have to play very well to beat. But I also expect they're looking at that Central Michigan score and saying, hey, this is a team that can be beat. And at any time you see a good FCS team playing an FBS team, picking up that extra win is huge for playoff positioning, which is what Idaho's playing for. At this point, they're a top 10 team in the nation. Idaho picks up a win over San Jose State. You would probably say they're in the driver's seat for a top 8 seed in the playoffs, which means skipping the first round and hosting a second round game at the least. But the groups I'm looking at, so offensively, I expect that Idaho is going to have to be a little bit more aggressive through the air than they were against Utah Tech. Now, part of that was because Idaho had no problem running the ball against Utah Tech, of course. But Joshua Wood is shown to be a very accurate passer at the short to mid-range game. We have not seen him take the top off of defense a ton, but we've seen guys drop passes when he took the top off of defense, but that's not a touchdown. So how Idaho chooses to use Joshua Wood is my first question. The receiving room is starting to sort of self out. Number 89, Ryan Jeziaro. Yeah, his name looks really weird. It's Jeziaro. 89, Ryan Jeziaro has been the number one target recently, 6'3" redshirt freshman. Kind of the other two guys who get the most passes are number 7, Emerson Cortez Menjivar, number 4, Tony Harsteed. Both those guys are returners from Idaho last season. So on the offensive side, that's what I'm interested in, is how aggressive Idaho going to be. Is it going to look a little bit more like St. Thomas, or look a little bit more like Utah Tech, where Idaho was really able to run the ball first, pass as needed. At the side of the ball, kind of two things. One, Idaho has been, as I said earlier, Idaho's been very good at controlling the run. But for a team that can do that, they haven't got to the quarterback that well this season. And look, they sit at 2-1. In my mind, should be 3-0. So I wouldn't say it's hurt them yet. But against a team like you're talking about, San Jose State's going to pass the ball. I would expect that is a point of emphasis for Idaho, is to try to get a little more pressure, to see if they can error, because any time an FCS team is going to pick up a win against an FBS team, unless it's being completely outclassed, like when Idaho beat Nevada 2 years ago, Nevada was just absolutely not as good as Idaho. This is a type of game where Idaho probably feels like, hey, we got to make San Jose State make a mistake or two. So one is, can they get to the quarterback a little bit? And two, I mean, you already did hit on it. Idaho's going to have to. I'm curious if they'll also consider just playing a little bit more zone to try to keep the receivers in front of them. Idaho's been more aggressive defensively this season under play caller Court Dennison. Dennison, by the way, former co DC at Arkansas, which he's a pretty young dude. Interesting story to be back at Idaho. But he was a very fast riser in the coaching industry for a while. He's now kind of rising back up as well. So I guess that's one of the two things defense is looking at. Can they get to the quarterback a little bit more, and can they tighten up a little bit? The discipline issue with Idaho seemed to be resolved last week. Utah Tech could get virtually nothing across the middle, which would seem like it was always open against St. Thomas. But if Idaho's going to pick up a W and keep this, or at the very least keep this close, the unit that's been exploited 2 out of the 3 games is going to have to look a little bit more like we saw last week.
Yeah, turnovers have been, a problem for San Jose State the first 2 weeks of the season. Obviously, in Texas, you would imagine, some mistakes there. I'm not. You can't knock them for that. Much more talented. What's that?
A lot of teams are going to look bad against Texas.
100%. So the expectations, for San Jose State as far as, winning the turnover battle were, not high. But the Central Michigan game, I think that's going to be the game where, everyone's going to circle back to, for San Jose State, because they were, a sizable favorite. And, they gave the ball away 3 times. So, that's going to have to be the script for Idaho. Force, just this offense, to make some mistakes, fumbles, ball security, the whole 9 yards. It's been an issue for San Jose State, and Coach Ken Niumatalolo for the Spartans knows that they have to clean that up. Brian, before we get you out of here, just for a guy that covers Idaho and that's out in those parts, I'm just curious on just for you, just your perspective of the Kibbe Dome, the game day environment out there. It's one of the more most would probably say unique and obscure stadiums in the sport. Just talk to me about that building, just what it means to the fan base down there, and just the game day environment, when that place is humming.
So the Kibbe Dome, I kind of enjoy that it's become a bit of a meme, these last few years. And Idaho's athletic department has really leaned into that meme, which was, to me, that objectively right call. One, there is no bad seat in the Kibbe Dome. Absolutely. It is not possible to have a bad seat. Honestly, like, the worst seats are the ones that are closest to the field because your angle's awful. But if you buy a general admission ticket and sit in the top row, that would equate to a very expensive ticket at most venues. And that's at Idaho. That's absolutely not expensive at all. I've got 2 younger kids, so we never know exactly how many games we'll get. So I bought 2 GA tickets, season tickets. That was $350 for 2 GA season tickets. Like, really not expensive. When the place is loud, which, hey, Idaho had multiple sellouts each of the last 2 seasons, which is kind of new because if you're San Jose State, you don't know this. I mean, Idaho dropped down. Idaho used to be FBS. Idaho dropped down in 2018. It was the absolutely right call. In my mind, Idaho never should have left in the first place. But going down a level of competition, it will never be energizing to the fan base. Like WSU, Washington State is living through that right now. So it's taken being good these last few years to really rehab Idaho football energy-wise. So it is a little variable week by week, how good the attendance is. But when we get sellouts at homecoming or some of the marquee games, or because Idaho was so rough for about 20 years, essentially Idaho has to right now reconvince the community every year that they're good. By the time that happens and you get the place at anywhere from 75% capacity higher, and Idaho, again, they've had sellouts, multiple sellouts last year, multiple sellouts the year before. It can be a very, very loud, fun place. And even last week, The announced attendance was around 8,000. Aaron Kinsey, who picked off Utah Tech's last pass, when he was interviewed, he asked, hey, like the standard interview question, like, hey, well, you saw that play, it was unfolding. Tell us what you were thinking. He said, like, I couldn't really think anything. Like, it was way too loud. Always that way. Nobody, when it's rocking, it's a pretty damn fun place to be. If you can ever get up here, I highly recommend it as one of the 8 wonders of the world. But like just unrelated thing, so if you look at the layout of the Kibbie Dome architecture, it essentially looks like a gigantic half beer can in the ground. The other half of that beer can is in southern Idaho at Idaho State because their arena is similar. I have a little bit more love in my heart for the Kibbie Dome. There's some minor things that are different, like the orient the field to the arc of the building for Idaho. It we run it. Our field runs the long way. Idaho State's perpendicular, so like if you punted Idaho State, the end of the building closest to the end zone is shorter. It's tallest at the 50-yard line for Idaho. With how it is, it's just always tall. So there's some minor things there, but if the basic question is, would we enjoy the Kibbie Dome? Would we change the Kibbie Dome? No, minor stuff, but big picture, no, we like it. It's part of who we are.
Love the answer. And just one more for you. Just you mentioned Idaho State, but man, that just for someone that respects rivalries and just the long history and just how the way the conference realignment stuff is now, and teams don't go to the rivalry games anymore and stuff like that. What does that, I guess, rivalry mean between Idaho and Idaho State just mean for within those two fan bases? I'm always interested to just get the fans and the fan bases, I guess, significance within their in-state rivalries.
So the Idaho State rivalry this might surprise you. It's on the newer side because for most of Idaho's existence, Boise State was the hated rival.
Mm.
That was the game that would sell out regardless of where it was. Boise State has essentially refused to play Idaho across all sports for more than a decade. Sometimes you can say like strength of schedule means that makes sense, but at like football, it makes no sense at all. Like they play Eastern Washington, but they can't play Idaho. Come on. So Idaho State and Idaho, they've kind of had to recommit. And one of the things that helped in developing that rivalry is when Idaho first bounced back down the Big Sky. Idaho State beat the hell out of Idaho. And that was really what I think got the players and then the fan base kind of followed to kind of recommit to this. And you can see results, not just not just at football games. Of course, Idaho's murdered Idaho State the last few times. But, some of the best attended basketball games during the season are now Idaho State. If you look at Idaho State, hello, that place is pretty dang close to sold out. So it's one of the things that Idaho's kind of Idaho gets reintegrated into the Big Sky, and it took the fans a minute to get reintegrated too. Although I'll tell you, making the playoffs, that will get a lot of people on board pretty quick. Since that's happened, the intensity of Idaho State has ratcheted up quite a bit. I'm sure you've seen the trophy that Idaho has, the Idaho State game. I got to see that. It used to be the Battle of the Domes, and it is like the generic trophy. But last year, the sponsorship changed over, and it's a gigantic carved wooden potato. Idaho's been willing to lean into what is weird or quirky these last few years, and at this level, that is absolutely the right call. So Idaho State's one of the teams in the Big Sky I paid the most attention to other than Idaho. So, I had to be sold as a fan on this as something to pay attention to as well. And I got to say, I don't have trouble paying attention at all. Montana's the other team in the conference that Idaho kind of identifies with as a rival first, you'd say. But Idaho State, that's certainly growing, gets a little bit better every year. I would not mind if the Bengals could make the football game competitive once in a while. But we'll get.
Hey, I love the response. I love the answers, and I from an outsider out here in California. Hey, I see the trophy. They market it. They're doing all the right things. So they're leaning into it, and I feel like that's a good sign. And just for the fan bases, and just for the sport as a whole. Brian, I know you got your own podcast yourself. You do a bunch of stuff, covering Idaho football. Where can people find your work?
So you can find us on Twitter at Club. If you're a San Jose listener who wants to know a little bit about Idaho, we're recording this right now on September 18th, later, which is Thursday. Our show Club will record on September 18th. Well, we're live, but it's available on YouTube and any podcast distributor. Just search Tubbs at the Club. There's no one else you'll find. So that's really the place to find us. If you want to harass me on Twitter, it's at Brian Marceau or at Tubbs at the Club as well. We have multiple people who handle that account. So that's where you can find us. Anyone wants to hop into our live show, we're always happy to have a lively comment section, you might say. But we each week we do 3 shows. Listeners might enjoy this later. San Jose State listeners too. We preview the game on Thursdays, then we do a reaction show to the game, regardless of outcome afterward. Usually, it's a bit of a mess to get to record because we travel down to the games, but on road games, usually we're live within 30 minutes of the game concluding. So, hey, win or lose, Spartans, you are absolutely welcome to hang out with Tubbs at the Club this Thursday or in the evening this Saturday.
Right on, Brian. Well, hey, appreciate the time, and best of luck this Saturday, and best of luck the rest of the season. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, that will do it for this episode of the Sports Sentiment. Once again, I am your host, Nick Urias, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.